Emma didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip, braced her boot against the concrete foundation she had spent the last 3 days pouring by hand, and pulled. She wiped her forearm across her forehead, leaving a streak of red clay across her brown skin, and examined the threading. "There you are," she said quietly, the way someone might greet an old enemy they'd been expecting. That was the exact moment 4 men in tactical gear stepped out of the tree line. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She looked up, looked at them, and then looked down. At their boots. At the wet cement she had mixed at 4 in the morning because the temperature was cooler and the mixture would set better. At the boot prints now pressed into the foundation she would have to repour. The silence was long enough to be uncomfortable. "I have spent 6 months," Emma said, her voice very calm, "teaching former assassins how to respect a floor." She stood up slowly, the wrench resting against her shoulder like a bat. "You have 5 seconds to step off my wet cement, or I will make you eat those tactical vests." The lead mercenary, a broad man with a jaw like a cinder block who went by the call sign Reyes, looked down at his boots, looked at his team, looked back at Emma. They grabbed her anyway. They were professionals. She was one woman. That was the logic, and it was not wrong exactly, but as Reyes would later explain to his supervisor, it was also not entirely right. Because the woman did not stop talking. Not when they walked her to the truck. Not when they zip-tied her wrists. She told them the tension was too tight and would cut off circulation, and one of them, a younger guy named Marcus, actually adjusted it. Not when they drove for 2 hours down roads that rattled every bone in a person's body. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Emma had pivoted from the mold problem she'd already identified on their visible gear to a broader conversation about career sustainability in the private military sector. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't performing bravery. She was genuinely, methodically making conversation the way she did with everyone, from village elders to corrupted water inspectors to one very dangerous man who cleaned his espresso machine with a microfiber cloth. Marcus, who was 26 and had been doing this kind of work since he was 19, found himself explaining that he didn't really have a retirement plan. He'd never thought that far ahead. "That's actually really common in high-risk occupations," Emma said. "It's a psychological defense mechanism. Planning for the future implies you believe you have one. But here's the thing, you're young. Compound interest alone if you start now." "Can you please stop?" Reyes said from the front seat. "I'm just saying, a Roth IRA on even a modest contribution at his age, by the time he's 55. We kidnapped you. I'm aware. That doesn't mean Marcus shouldn't have a financial safety net. These aren't mutually exclusive concerns." There was silence for approximately 45 seconds. "What's a Roth IRA?" said the man everyone called Teeth, from the back row. Emma turned to face him, zip-tied wrists and red clay still on her face, and began to explain. "Now, before we go any further, if the story already has you, if you felt something watching a kidnapped woman use a wrench as a prop and immediately pivot to retirement planning, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me your first reaction to this opening, and subscribe, because the story only gets more unhinged and more beautiful from here. Every single comment gets read. Every one. Now let's go back 6 months, because to understand why Emma said what she said to that camera, and what Ji-Hoon Kong did the moment he saw it, you need to understand what these two people had already survived together. Emma Osei had not planned to become the housekeeper of Seoul's most feared criminal boss. She had planned to finish her master's degree in environmental policy, eat too much ramen, and go home with a diploma and some good memories. What she got instead was a job listing posted at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday on an expat job board. No photos, no employer description, just an address in the most expensive district in Seoul, a salary that made her sit up straight, and 3 words where a job description should have been: clean, quiet, discreet. She sent her resume at midnight. She was hired by noon the next day. She moved in by 7 p.m. She met Ji-Hoon Kong on her second morning, when he walked into the kitchen and found her reorganizing it. His first words to her were, "Who moved the coffee?" She told him she had, explained why, and held his gaze without difficulty, because she did not yet know who he was, and therefore had not yet been given the information that would have made most people look away. She stayed for months. She reorganized rooms, instituted a shoes-off policy, moved his coffee back every single time he moved it to the wrong cabinet, And eventually, on the night 12 men tracked mud across her freshly cleaned rug and someone put a glass directly onto her would surface without a coaster. She stood in the doorway in an oversized hoodie holding a mop and a 42-page contract, invoked Section 4 Clause B, and fired Ji-hoon Kang from his own home. He picked up his jacket and left. That was how they met. Not through paperwork or nonprofit compliance. Through sticky notes on a cabinet door and a woman who had infinite patience and nowhere to be, and a man who had never once in his life been spoken to like the answer was already obvious and he simply hadn't caught up yet. She left 6 months before the kidnapping, taking with her a photograph of a river in Kenya and a water access project proposal that needed funding. Ji-hoon transferred the full amount to the NGO account the same day she left, wrote no note, and went back to cleaning the espresso machine. That was the version of the story he kept to himself. The one he opened 4 times on his personal device in 6 months, just to look at the photograph of the river. That had been 6 months ago. The Seoul underworld had stabilized around Ji-hoon's quiet dominance, and it was that very quietness that was now attracting the wrong kind of attention. His name was Viper and he was 29 years old, which in this world was almost aggressively young. He wore ripped jackets because he thought it made him look dangerous and not, as it actually did, like someone who had watched too many music videos. His organization was loud, chaotic, always on the edge of collapse, and somehow that chaos had become his brand. The underworld understood ruthlessness. It understood brutality. What it did not understand, increasingly, was Ji-hoon Kang calmly discussing conflict resolution over coffee that he had personally brewed. He cleans the machine himself, Viper said, dropping a surveillance photo on the table. Every morning, with a little cloth. His lieutenant, a man named Juan, looked at the photo. Maybe he just likes coffee. Nobody in our world makes their own coffee. You have people for that. Viper shook his head. He's gone soft. And soft men have pressure points. Find me his pressure point. Juan's team spent 11 days going through Ji-hoon's digital footprint, which was, for a man of his influence, impressively small. Almost nothing personal. No visible relationships, no family contact, nothing that could be used as leverage. Except one anomaly. A financial transfer to a Kenyan NGO. A series of internal emails, redacted but traceable by the account address. And one photo, a river, wide and gold in afternoon light, that had been opened 4 times from Ji-hoon's personal device in the past 6 months. They found the project, found the site, found the name. Emma, project coordinator. Currently in a remote village 2 hours outside Nairobi, installing a clean water filtration system with a team of 6 local engineers, and what their recon photos described as one absurdly large wrench. Viper looked at the photo of Emma standing ankle-deep in red mud, holding a pipe coupling above her head like a trophy. Her, he said. Bring her in. Juan looked at the photo for a moment. Something about the way she was standing gave him a mild, unspecific feeling of concern that he could not articulate. Quietly, Viper added. That was, as previously established, his first mistake. By the time the truck carrying Emma pulled through the gates of Viper's compound, a cluster of reinforced shipping containers on a flat stretch of land that Emma had already clocked as being in the wrong orientation relative to the prevailing wind, which was going to make the interior temperature unmanageable in the afternoon hours. She had secured commitments from Marcus and Teeth to look into retirement account options, identified the mold situation on the exterior ventilation seams, and estimated that the compound had approximately 8 to 11 months before the structural integrity of the northeast container wall became a genuine liability. Reyes opened the back of the truck. Emma stepped out, looked at the compound, looked at the sky, looked at Reyes. Your east wall has a mold problem, she said. Load-bearing issue in under a year. I'd want to deal with that before winter. Reyes stared at her. I'm just saying. It's relevant to everyone's long-term health outcomes here, including yours. She was walked inside. She did not look afraid. She looked, if anything, mildly annoyed about the cement. The container they put her in was better than expected. That was Emma's first assessment. Someone had installed a folding cot, a single overhead light, and a ventilation slot that, while inadequate by any reasonable standard, at least meant the air wasn't completely static. She noted the mold along the upper seam again. Same strain as outside, which told her the whole structure was compromised, not just one section. And then she sat down on the cot, held her still zip-tied wrists up toward the light and examined the plastic. Standard restraint zip tie. The kind you could find in any hardware store. She'd used the same brand to secure pipe couplings when she ran low on clamps. She put her hands down and waited. Took 11 minutes. The door opened and a guard stepped in. Not Reyes, not Marcus. A new one, compact and watchful, who set a bottle of water on the floor without making eye contact. "Thank you," Emma said. He hesitated, clearly not expecting courtesy. "Can I ask how long you've been stationed here?" He said nothing. "I'm asking because of the mold. If you've been here more than 4 months, you may already be experiencing symptoms. Fatigue, mild respiratory irritation, maybe some congestion you've been writing off as dust exposure. That's actually mycotoxin response. It's cumulative. The longer you stay, the more it compounds." The guard's jaw shifted slightly. "What's your name?" Emma asked. Another silence. Then, reluctantly, "Sue. Sue. How long have you been here?" 7 months. Emma nodded slowly, the way she did when data confirmed a hypothesis. "Okay, you're going to want to get a chest x-ray at some point soon. Not urgently, but put it on the list. Do you have medical coverage through your employer?" Sue stared at her for a long moment, then walked out. Emma picked up the water bottle, took a measured sip, and began, quietly and methodically, to work on the zip tie. She had it off in 40 minutes using the corner edge of the cot frame. Not because she was going to run. There were at least 8 guards on rotation. She counted footsteps through the container wall, and the terrain outside was flat and open enough that she wouldn't get 50 meters. She took it off because she found restraints cognitively limiting, and she needed to think clearly. She needed to record a video. Getting her phone had required a separate negotiation. They'd taken it at the truck, but Emma had pointed out, with complete seriousness, that if the goal was a ransom exchange and not an extended kidnapping, Ji-hoon would need proof of life, and a proof of life video delivered via a phone she personally recorded would carry significantly more credibility than anything Viper's team staged. She'd laid out the logic calmly, cited 2 cases where amateur proof of life videos had been dismissed as fabrications and delayed payments by weeks, and watched Reyes's eyes move through the calculation. He gave her the phone back. Supervised, with the camera app locked to video-only mode, her own contacts blocked. She didn't need her contacts. She knew Ji-hoon's direct line by heart, not because she'd called it often, but because Emma memorized things by instinct, the way other people memorize the words to songs they'd heard 3 times. She sat down in front of the light, made sure her face was clearly visible, and pressed record. She did not perform distress. She looked directly into the camera because that was the only way Ji-hoon ever listened, when you looked directly at him, when you didn't let him redirect the conversation into logistics before you'd finished your actual point. "Ji-hoon, if you pay this ransom, I will fire you again." She paused, let that land. "Also, tell Park he left the stove on in the safe house. I can see it in the background of their TikTok. The pilot light's been flickering for weeks. He needs to call someone about that." She allowed herself the smallest possible softening of her voice. "I'm fine. The mold situation here is concerning but manageable." A pause. "Don't rush." She stopped the recording, looked at the screen for a moment, pressed it again. "Rush a little." She handed the phone back to Reyes through the door and returned to the cot. At 6:47 the following morning, Ji-hoon Kong was folding his microfiber cloth into exact quarters. The espresso machine was already clean. He did this in the same order every day. Backflush the group head, wipe the steam wand, clear the drip tray, fold the cloth. The ritual was not about the machine. The machine was simply where he put his attention when his mind needed to run somewhere else beneath the surface. During these 20 minutes, he could think through anything without the thinking showing on his face. His phone lit up. He looked at it. An incoming transfer notification from an unknown relay, the kind that required a second authentication, the kind that only came from one category of sender. He set the cloth down, dried his hands, and opened it. The video was 47 seconds long. He watched it once. Then he set the phone on the counter and stood completely still for a moment, looking at the espresso machine. Then he picked up the phone and called Park. Park answered on the second ring. "I saw it. The stove," Ji-hoon said. "Already sent Dae-young to handle it." A pause. "She looks calm." "She is calm. Should she be that calm?" Ji-hoon thought about the woman he'd watched reorganize a penthouse with the focused energy of someone defusing a device. The woman who had stood in a doorway with a mop and a contract and fired him from his own home without raising her voice once. The woman who had put a sticky note on a cabinet door that said, "I have infinite patience and nowhere to be," and had meant every single word of it. Yes, he said. She should be exactly that calm. And us? Ji-hoon looked at the clock. 6:52 a.m. Private aviation could be arranged by 9. Flight time was 7 hours, 40 minutes. Ground transport from Nairobi. We leave at 9, he said. Full team. No. Just us. He paused. 3. The silence on the line had a particular quality. Park had been with Ji-hoon for 10 years. He knew the difference between operational calm and something underneath it, something that ran hotter and steadier than strategy. He'd seen Ji-hoon move through every version of a difficult situation without breaking surface tension. He had never heard exactly this quality in his voice before. Just us, Park agreed. I'll brief Dae-young when he's back. Ji-hoon. Park hesitated. She said not to rush. I know what she said. She also said she'd fire you. Ji-hoon picked up the microfiber cloth again. Looked at it. Set it down. She doesn't work for me, he said. She hasn't for 6 months. Right? So the firing is a theoretical position. Right? We leave at 9. He ended the call. In the compound 2 hours outside Nairobi, Emma had by this point been moved to a larger container, an apparent upgrade after Sue had reported, to his own visible bewilderment, that the previous space was inadequate given the ventilation problem and that the hostage had pointed this out in a way that made it impossible to disagree with. The new space had 2 cots, a folding chair, and a small table that someone had sourced from what looked like a school. Emma appreciated the table. She had begun making notes on the back of a water bottle label, the only paper available, using a pen she had found in her jacket pocket. The notes were a structural assessment of the compound. Not because she was planning an escape in any tactical sense, but because identifying problems and mapping solutions was simply what her brain did when it had nothing else to occupy it. She worked through the mold, the orientation problem, the water supply, which appeared to run from a gravity-fed tank that hadn't been serviced in at least 18 months based on the color of the overflow marks on the exterior. She was deep in a calculation about water flow rates when Reyes opened the door and told her that Viper wanted to meet her. Emma capped her pen, stood up, straightened her jacket, which was still dusty from the sight. Does he have coffee? She asked. Reyes blinked. What? I haven't had coffee since yesterday morning. If he wants a functional conversation, I'd recommend starting with coffee. Low blood sugar affects my conflict resolution capacity, and I assume he wants this to go well. There was a pause. I'll see what we have, Reyes said. There was instant coffee. It was terrible. Emma drank it without complaint, sat down across from a young man in a ripped jacket who was clearly performing a version of Dangerous that he'd curated carefully, and looked at him with the same direct, undivided attention she gave to everyone. You're not afraid of me, Viper said. It wasn't a question. I'm mildly concerned about the mold situation, Emma said, which is a different kind of fear, more long-term. Viper stared at her. Why don't you tell me what you actually want? Emma said. Not the ransom. The real thing. What are you trying to prove? And to whom? The silence that followed was the kind that happened when someone asked the right question at the wrong time, or possibly the right time, depending on which side of it you were standing on. Viper's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the table, were not quite still. Emma waited. She was extremely good at waiting. Viper's real name was Shin Jae-won. Emma didn't know that yet, but she would, because Emma had a particular skill for creating the conditions under which people told her things they had not planned to say. It wasn't manipulation, it was something closer to the opposite. She simply paid complete attention, and complete attention, in a world where almost no one received it, functioned like a solvent. It dissolved things people had spent years keeping sealed. I want him to know, Viper said finally, that he's not untouchable. Ji-hoon, Emma said. He walks around like the world already belongs to him, like nothing can reach him. And you think taking me reaches him? Viper's chin lifted. Doesn't it? Emma considered this. She had a habit when thinking of going completely still, No fidgeting, no filler sounds, just a pause that sometimes made people nervous and sometimes made them feel, strangely, like they were being taken seriously for the first time in a while. She let the pause sit. It might, she said. But I want you to think about something. You went looking for the one thing that could get Ji-hoon's attention. And the thing you found was me. A project coordinator who was fixing a water pump in Kenya. What does that tell you about what actually matters to him? Viper frowned. That he's soft. Or, Emma said, that he's honest. Those aren't the same thing. She watched something shift in his face. Subtle. A tightening around the eyes that wasn't anger. Exactly. But something adjacent to it. The kind of expression that meant a person had been handed a thought they didn't want but couldn't put back down. You think being feared means you've won something, she said. I'm not saying that to be provocative. I'm saying it because I've watched it up close. And I want to ask you, what does a day look like for you when it's going well? Not a victory. Just a day that feels okay. Viper opened his mouth. Closed it. Take your time, Emma said. He sat with that for a while. The cheap fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly. Outside, someone was doing a guard rotation. She could hear the footstep pattern, the same 3-beat rhythm she'd been tracking since she arrived. Slightly uneven because the leftmost guard had a gait issue that suggested either an old knee injury or a badly fitted boot. My dad had this workshop, Viper said slowly, like someone pulling a splinter. When I was a kid, he made furniture. Nothing fancy, just it was organized. Every tool had a hook. Every piece of wood was sorted by size. He stopped. I used to go in there just to sit, even when I wasn't doing anything. Emma nodded. Not the encouraging, performative nod, the real one, the one that meant, I heard you and I'm keeping it. What happened to the workshop? She asked. The shift in his face this time was different. Deeper. We lost the apartment. When I was 9, everything went into storage. The storage got foreclosed. He exhaled through his nose. He never set up another one. Because it hurt too much, Emma said. Viper said nothing, which was its own answer. So you've been living in the messy version ever since, Emma said. Because the organized version got taken. And if you build something ordered, something that has a place for everything, it can be taken again. The fluorescent light buzzed. Viper's hands on the table were very still now. The chaos isn't your personality, Emma said. Not unkindly. It's your armor. If nothing is ordered, nothing can be taken from you. But here's what that costs you, Jaewon. He looked up sharply at his real name. It costs you the workshop. The thing you actually wanted. The place you went to just to sit. The silence that followed was the kind that happens in the small hours of the night when someone finally stops running. Emma didn't fill it. She let him have it because it belonged to him. He didn't cry immediately. It built slowly, the kind of crying that comes after years of pressure with no release valve, the kind that starts behind the eyes and takes a while to get to the surface. By the time it did, Emma had moved her hand across the table and covered his, and she was saying, in the same calm, unhurried voice she used for everything, it's okay. That's supposed to be in there. That's not weakness. That's just the real thing. Viper Shin Jae-won, 29 years old, the most chaotic rising criminal force in Asia, put his other hand over his face and cried in a way he probably hadn't since he was 9 years old in a foreclosed apartment building, wondering where his father's workshop had gone. Emma patted his hand. She did not look victorious. She looked the way she always looked when someone let something true out into the open. Steady, and a little tired and genuinely glad for them. She did not notice the door opening. She did not hear the first guard neutralized in the corridor 30 feet back, because Ji-hoon used suppressed rounds and moved like water over flat stone. No friction, no unnecessary sound. She did not hear Park clearing the eastern checkpoint or Dae-young disabling the compound's external communications with the efficiency of someone who had done it so many times it had become boring. What she did hear, finally, was the particular quality of silence that entered a room just before Ji-hoon Kong did. She had noticed it the first time he walked into a meeting, the way the air changed slightly, the way every person in a room made some small unconscious adjustment, like plants turning toward light or away from a pressure system. She had told herself the first time she noticed it that it was just charisma. Then she'd spent 8 weeks in close proximity to it and decided it was something more structural than charisma. It was the feeling of being in the presence of someone who had decided, fully and without reservation, what they were and what they would do, and who had not revisited that decision in a long time. She looked up. Ji-hoon was standing in the doorway. He had technically burst in. She heard the door connect with the container wall with a sound like a starting gun. But burst implied a loss of control, and Ji-hoon did not lose control. So what he had actually done was open the door with complete decisive force while remaining entirely composed, which produced an effect somewhere between an entrance and a statement. He was in his suit. She didn't know what she'd expected, tactical gear, maybe some concession to the terrain and the circumstances, but no. Dark suit, white shirt, the top button undone, which was the maximum visible concession Ji-hoon Kong made to informality. His gun was up, sweeping the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times. He stopped. He took in the scene. Emma at the table, hand over the hand of a crying man in a ripped jacket. The cheap coffee cups. The buzzing fluorescent light. The complete absence of crisis. Slowly, Ji-hoon lowered the gun. Behind him, Park appeared in the doorframe, took in the same scene, and had the grace to keep his expression almost entirely neutral. Almost. Ji-hoon looked at Emma. Emma looked at Ji-hoon. "You came," she said. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was something quieter, the confirmation of something she had not let herself fully believe until this moment. "You said to rush a little," he said. "I said don't rush and then rush a little. Those are different instructions. I processed them in order of importance." Park, in the doorway, looked at the ceiling briefly. Viper, still at the table, hand now released, in the middle of an emotional experience he had not signed up for when he ordered the kidnapping, became aware that Ji-hoon Kong was now in the room and that the gun, while lowered, was still in his hand. What remained of his composure left with some speed. Ji-hoon looked at him. Not the way someone looks at a threat. The way someone looks at an inconvenience they have decided not to spend energy on. He walked to the table, moved Viper's chair to the side with one deliberate push of his foot. Not violent, just conclusive, and reached down. Emma stood. Ji-hoon pulled her up by both arms and did not let go. The hug was not elegant. It was the opposite of everything Ji-hoon Kong presented to the world. It was immediate and total, both arms, no space between them, his face against her hair. Emma felt the exhale move through him like something leaving a room. She let him have it. For a long moment, she just let him have it. Then she pulled back, looked up, and the corner of her mouth moved. "You're late for your shift," she said. Ji-hoon looked down at her. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite the opposite. Something that lived in the territory between relief and all the things he hadn't said in 6 months. "You're not on a shift," he said. "You were kidnapped. I'm aware. I had it mostly handled. You were tied to a chair. I was tied to a chair for about 40 minutes. After that, I took the zip tie off and started working on the compound assessment." Ji-hoon stared at her. "The east wall has a serious mold situation," Emma said. "Load-bearing risk within the year. I already mentioned it to Reyes, but I don't think he wrote it down." From the doorway, Park said, very carefully, "Should I take the asset?" He gestured vaguely at Viper, who was sitting in the relocated chair with the slightly unfocused expression of someone who had just processed a decade's worth of suppressed emotion in 3 hours and was not entirely sure what time zone they were in. Ji-hoon looked at Viper. For a long moment he simply looked at him. This young man who had decided the best way to announce himself to the world was to reach into the one small, unguarded place Ji-hoon had allowed to exist. The calculation behind Ji-hoon's eyes was visible in the way that arithmetic is visible when someone is doing it slowly and with precision. Then he looked back at Emma. "What do you want to do with him?" he asked. It was such a surprising sentence that Park actually took a small step forward to make sure he'd heard it correctly. Ji-hoon Kong did not ask that question. Ji-hoon Kong assessed situations and made decisions, and the decisions were, by general consensus, the correct ones. He did not outsource the question. Emma looked at Viper. Viper looked back at her with the expression of a man who was aware that his immediate future was being decided and who had, somewhere in the last 3 hours, lost his appetite for chaos. "He's not going to be a problem anymore," Emma said. "Not as a hope, as a statement." Viper said nothing, which was, in context, agreement. "He needs to find a workshop," Emma added, and Ji-hoon did not ask what this meant. Because Ji-hoon did not ask questions he calculated he would understand eventually. He simply filed it. Leave him, Ji-hoon said to Park. Park processed this. And the organization? He understands the situation. Ji-hoon said this to Park, but his eyes moved briefly to Viper, and the look communicated, without any words, a complete set of information about what happened to people who failed to understand their situations correctly the second time. Viper gave a small nod. It was the nod of someone who had genuinely recalibrated and was grateful for the opportunity to do so, which was not a response Ji-hoon typically generated in rivals. Emma had done that, in 3 hours, with a cup of terrible instant coffee and the full weight of her attention. Park stepped aside from the doorway. Dae-young appeared behind him, gave the room a brief professional assessment, looked at Viper, looked at Emma, looked at Ji-hoon, and decided that this situation did not require his input. They moved through the compound in reverse. Ji-hoon with his hand at Emma's back, not gripping, just present, a pressure that said, "You are here, I know where you are." Emma walked at her normal pace, which was not slow. She noted, as they passed through the corridor, that the ventilation situation on the north side was actually worse than the south, which she was adding to the structural assessment that she would, apparently, still be completing from memory. "You're cataloging the compound," Ji-hoon said. "It wasn't a question. The people who work here have long-term health exposure risks. Someone should document it. You were just kidnapped. And now I'm being unkidnapped. I can do both." Outside, the night air was flat and warm and smelled like dry grass and red clay. The sky overhead was the kind of sky that only exists far from city light. Fully occupied, stars pressing down close, the Milky Way a visible smear across the center of it. Emma stopped for just a moment and looked up. Ji-hoon stopped with her. He looked up too, following her gaze, and for a few seconds neither of them said anything. Just two people standing in the dark outside a compound in rural Kenya, looking at the same sky, the sounds of Park and Dae-young completing the vehicle check behind them. "You came yourself," Emma said, still looking up. "Yes. Not an army." "No. Why not?" Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. "An army is a message. I didn't want to send a message." Emma looked at him then. "What did you want?" He met her eyes. "To come myself." She held the look for a second. Then she turned toward the vehicle, and Ji-hoon fell into step beside her. And the thing that had been said without being said exactly hung in the warm night air between them. The drive back to Nairobi took 2 hours. Emma sat in the back with Ji-hoon, Park in the front, Dae-young driving. Park had produced, from somewhere in the operational kit, a thermos of coffee. He handed it back without comment. Emma wrapped both hands around the thermos and drank, closed her eyes briefly, and exhaled. "Good?" Ji-hoon asked. "Medium. Better than the instant coffee." "The instant coffee from your captors." They were very apologetic about it once I explained caffeine's role in baseline cognitive function. Ji-hoon looked at the side of her face. The clay dust still on her forehead. The ink on her wrist where she'd run out of paper and had continued the compound assessment. The complete, uncomplicated steadiness of her, as if being taken across international borders by mercenaries and then delivering an impromptu therapy session to a crime lord, was simply something that had happened, like traffic. "Emma," he said. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I'm going to need you to tell me you're actually okay. Not as a transaction. Not as data verification. The way you say it when the alternative is not something you want to sit with." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Really looked, the way she looked at the pump housing at 4 in the morning, the way she looked at a contract with a pricing inconsistency, the way she looked at Viper when she asked what a good day felt like. With the full weight of attention she gave to everything. "I'm actually okay," she said. "I was scared for about 8 minutes, when they first grabbed me. Then I started problem solving and the fear turned into something I could work with." 8 minutes, Ji-hoon said. "I'm not going to claim I was never afraid. I was. But after that," she paused. "I knew you'd come." The car was quiet. Outside, the darkness moved past at highway speed. "I knew you'd come," she said again. "And I knew you'd be fast, and I knew you wouldn't do anything loud or messy about it. So I just had to manage the situation until you got there." Ji-hoon said nothing for a moment. Then, You managed the situation by giving investment advice to the mercenaries and providing therapy to the man who had you kidnapped. I provided emotional processing guidance. It's different. It's not different. It's slightly different. From the front seat, Park made a sound that was technically a cough but was not a cough. Ji-hoon was looking at her with an expression that she had catalogued, over 8 weeks of close proximity, as the one he used when something had moved past his defenses before he'd noticed it coming. He used it rarely. She had seen it once when Park told him a joke at the end of a very difficult day, and once when one of the community kitchen coordinators sent a photo of a program milestone, and once, just once, when Emma had put a cup of coffee on his desk exactly the way he liked it without being asked and then left without saying anything about it. He was using it now. I have a proposal, Emma said. Ji-hoon's eyebrows moved slightly. You want to negotiate. I'm always negotiating. You've had 6 months to figure that out. Name the terms. 1 week, she said. In the village. You help me finish the filtration system. She paused. And you wear the apron. Ji-hoon looked at her. Outside, Kenya moved past in the dark. Inside the car, Park and Dae-young were performing an impressive act of being completely absent despite being physically present. The apron is non-negotiable? Ji-hoon said. Deeply non-negotiable. Another pause. Fine, Ji-hoon said. Emma smiled. Not the small, careful corner of the mouth movement. The real one. The one she didn't hand out routinely. Ji-hoon watched it happen and said nothing, because some things did not require comment. They stayed at a guest house in the nearest town that night. 3 small rooms, clean but minimal. A shared courtyard with a mango tree in the center. Emma slept immediately and completely, with the total physical confidence of someone who had never allowed exhaustion to be theatrical. Ji-hoon did not sleep for several hours. He sat in the courtyard under the mango tree and looked at his phone. He had 17 messages from lieutenants, 2 from lawyers, 1 from the building manager of his sole office regarding a HVAC issue, and 1 notification from the property management system flagging that the stove in the safe house had been properly repaired and tested. He opened the safe house notification. Read it. Thought, briefly and precisely, about the woman who had identified a stove problem from the background of a kidnapper's TikTok while sitting zip-tied in a shipping container, and had included it as an actionable item in a hostage video. He closed all the messages without responding to any of them and looked at the mango tree instead. Park came out of his room at some point. Still in his suit jacket, Park had the relationship with formal clothing that other people had with pajamas, and sat in the second chair without invitation or explanation. They sat like that for a while, the way people who have worked together for a decade sometimes can, in a silence that was not empty. She said she knew you'd come, Park said eventually. Ji-hoon didn't respond. That's trust, Park said, not making a point. Stating a fact the way you'd state that the sun was going to come up. I know what it is, Ji-hoon said. Do you know what to do with it? Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment. A nightbird made a sound somewhere in the tree. I know what I want to do with it, he said. Park accepted this. The week here. The apron. Yes. You understand the apron is going to circulate. Among the men. The men can find new employment if the apron becomes an issue. Park nodded slowly. Fair. They sat for another stretch of quiet. She fixed him, Ji-hoon said. Viper. In 3 hours. Fixed is maybe strong. She gave him something to work with. Something real. Ji-hoon looked at the middle distance, where the courtyard wall met the night sky. She does that. She just does that. And she doesn't make it look like anything. She doesn't make you feel small for needing it. Park looked at him, carefully. I know, he said. I've noticed. Ji-hoon glanced over. For 6 months, Park said. I've noticed. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and went back to his room without further elaboration, which was, Ji-hoon thought, the most disciplined form of communication Park had ever deployed. Ji-hoon sat under the mango tree until the sky began to lighten at the edges, then went to sleep for 4 hours and woke up ready. The village was an hour's drive from the guest house, on a road that had good intentions and poor execution. Emma sat in the front seat and narrated the landscape with the enthusiasm of someone who had been working in it for 6 months, and had developed a personal relationship with it. That cluster of acacia trees marked the boundary of the Muriathi family's land. That water tower in the distance was the one that still used a manual pump system she was hoping to upgrade in the next phase. That school with the yellow walls had the best chai she'd found in the region, available from a woman named Mrs. Kamau who sold it from a blue thermos on weekday mornings. Ji-hoon listened. He asked one question. The second phase. When does it start? Emma looked over at him. Funding dependent. The first filtration system, once it's running, should demonstrate the model well enough to attract the next grant cycle. How much is the gap? She named a number. Not a large one, not by the scale Ji-hoon operated on. A manageable number. Ji-hoon was quiet. Then, send me the grant documentation. I'll review it. Emma looked at him for a long moment. You'd need to go through a proper channel. My NGO has compliance requirements. I can use a proper channel. Ji-hoon. I've used proper channels before. You have also, on at least 2 occasions that I'm aware of, restructured the channel to fit your needs. That's just efficiency. Emma turned back to the road. She was smiling. She didn't try to stop it. Fine. I'll send you the documentation. When they arrived at the project site, Emma's team, 6 local engineers and one absolutely unflappable project lead named Joseph, who had been coordinating the build for 11 months and treated all developments with equanimity, came out to meet them. There was a moment where the team looked at the 3 men in suits standing next to their vehicle in a dusty Kenyan village at 8 in the morning and calibrated. Joseph looked at Emma. Friends, he said. Consultants, Emma said. Temporary labor. They're helping with the filtration build. Joseph looked at Ji-hoon specifically, taking in the suit, the quality of the shoes, the absolute stillness of someone who was used to every room being arranged around their presence. Can he carry pipe? Joseph asked Emma. He can carry anything, Emma said. He does not know this about himself yet, but he will by Friday. Ji-hoon, for the record, had not been spoken about in the third person while present since he was approximately 8 years old, and he was not certain how to respond to it, which Emma had anticipated, which was why she'd done it. The apron appeared at 9 a.m. It was a standard canvas work apron, the kind used for heavy construction tasks. It had the NGO's logo on the chest. Emma held it out. Ji-hoon looked at it. Non-negotiable, Emma said. Ji-hoon took the apron, put it on, tied it at the back, and turned around. Park looked at him. Dae-young looked at the middle distance with profound effort. Emma looked at Ji-hoon in the apron over the suit and something warm moved across her face. Perfect, she said. Then she handed him a section of pipe and walked toward the excavation site, and Ji-hoon Kong, owner of the most efficiently run criminal organization in Seoul, the man the underworld thought had gone soft because he cleaned his own espresso machine, followed her carrying the pipe because that was the work. The days that followed were something none of them had a category for. Ji-hoon worked. Not the kind of working he was built for, not strategy and negotiation and the precise management of competing forces, but physical, actual labor. Trenches. Pipe connections. Concrete. The sun at this latitude was direct and uninterested in exception, and by the second afternoon his jacket was long gone. His sleeves were rolled past the elbow, and there was red clay on his hands in a way that no amount of immediate cleaning was going to address. He didn't seem to mind. Emma noticed this, the absence of resistance in him. She had expected, at minimum, a learning curve. Some friction between who Ji-hoon Kong was and what carrying a 40-pound water pipe required of him. Instead, there was something almost like absorption. He watched Joseph for 20 minutes, asked 2 specific questions about the pipe coupling technique, and then did it correctly every time after that with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided to be competent at the new thing and was following through. You're good at this, Joseph told him on day 2 with some surprise. Ji-hoon considered this. The principles are similar, he said. Joseph looked at him. To what? To anything. Identify the system. Find the inefficiencies. Fix them in order of structural importance. Joseph was quiet for a moment. Ha, he said. And then he handed Ji-hoon a measuring tape and went to find Park, who had spent the morning organizing the materials storage area with a thoroughness that had made 2 of the local team members stop and watch in silent admiration. Park had discovered the school on the first evening. He had gone to return a borrowed tool to the principal and had come back an hour later with a volunteer schedule he'd negotiated in English and 3 hand gestures. He was now spending his mornings teaching the children how to make hospital corners on their cots. An activity that served no obvious practical purpose, but that Park performed with the seriousness of someone conveying essential life knowledge, and that the children participated in with matching gravity. De-Jong fixed things. Anything that was broken, he fixed, and when there was nothing broken, he identified things that were on their way to being broken and addressed those too. By day 3, he was regarded by the village maintenance team as something approaching mythological. Emma watched all of this. She did not comment on it. She just let it be what it was. In the evenings, after the work was done and the team had eaten, she and Ji-hoon sat by the river. The same river from the photograph, wide and gold at this hour, catching the last light before it dropped below the acacia line. They talked or they didn't. Both were easy with it in a way that neither of them had expected. On the third evening, Ji-hoon said, "Tell me about the first day you were here." Emma looked at the water. "I arrived at the beginning of the dry season. The main well had already been dry for 3 weeks. The children were walking 4 kilometers twice a day to the next functioning source." She paused. "I sat here that first evening and I thought, this is solvable. It's just physics. Water moves from here to there if you build the right path." She glanced at him. "Most things are like that when you look at them correctly." Ji-hoon looked at the river. "Most things," he said. "Most things," she confirmed. "Not everything." The light changed. The water went from gold to copper to something darker. "Emma," he said. She turned to look at him. "I'm not going back to the same thing," he said. It was not an announcement. It was a fact he was stating out loud for the first time, to the only person he'd calculated could receive it correctly. Emma held his eyes. "I know," she said. "I've known since you put the apron on without arguing." On the 5th day, they ran the water. It was not dramatic in the way that the movies made it look. No single moment of explosion, no gushing climax. It was a slow, methodical increase in pressure through the filtration system, checked at each coupling by Joseph and Emma and 2 engineers named Peter and Faith, with Ji-hoon on the main valve and De-Jong watching the pressure gauge with the fixed attention of someone who had been told exactly what number to call out. 70, De-Jong said. "Hold," Emma said. Silence. The pipe system ticked and settled. 80. Hold. Another pause. Then Joseph nodded at Emma, and Emma looked at Ji-hoon, and Ji-hoon turned the valve the rest of the way. The water came through the outlet pipe in a steady, clean, absolutely unremarkable flow. It ran into the collection basin they'd poured on day 2. It ran clear. Faith checked the output with a test strip, held it up, looked at it, and said something in Kikuyu that Emma had learned was an expression of uncomplicated gratitude. The team was quiet for a moment. Then Peter laughed, a surprised, full sound, and Joseph put his hand briefly on Emma's shoulder, and the children who had gathered at the perimeter of the site broke into noise all at once. Emma didn't cry. She stood at the edge of the collection basin and watched the water run, and her face had the expression she got when something that was supposed to work actually worked. Not triumph, just rightness. This was where the thing was supposed to arrive, and it had arrived, and that was enough. Ji-hoon stood beside her. He was still in the work clothes, the jacket still gone, sleeves still rolled, the apron over everything. His hands were rough in a way they hadn't been 6 days ago. He was watching the water too. "Worth it," Emma said. "Yes," Ji-hoon said. She glanced over at him. He was already looking at her. Later, when the celebration had run its course and the team had gone home and the evening was setting in, Emma made coffee. She had a small camp stove and a pour-over kit that she'd brought from the guest house, and she made it the way she'd watched Ji-hoon make it once. Measuring carefully, temperature of the water calibrated by feel and timing, a slow pour in concentric circles. She handed him the cup. He took it, looked at it, looked at her. "Upper left cabinet?" he asked. The reference so small it could have meant nothing. Except it meant the specific cabinet in the specific room in the specific building where they had spent 8 weeks developing the habit of knowing exactly where things were kept. It meant, is this still the version of us where everything has an assigned place and the rules are already written? Emma looked at him. "No," she said. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and leaned her head against him. "This is a new house." She looked at the river. "We can put the coffee wherever we want." The sentence held for a moment in the air over the water. Ji-hoon took out his phone. He navigated to his documents folder, found the file house_rules_final_v7.pdf, last modified 14 months ago, 23 pages, every contingency, every protocol, every assigned place for every possible thing. He looked at it. Then he deleted it. He put the phone back in his pocket, picked up the coffee, looked at the river, then at Emma, then at the river again. Joseph's team will need someone to supervise the Phase 2 documentation, he said. Emma smiled against his shoulder. You reviewed the grant materials. Last night. The gap is manageable. I've identified a channel. A proper channel. A proper channel. She was quiet for a moment. You'd have to come back, she said, to consult on the implementation. That seems likely. And you'd have to wear the apron. The apron is apparently my professional uniform now. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, the real one, the same one she'd given exactly twice in 8 weeks and that Ji-hoon had, at the time, filed away with the specific care you give to things that are rare and worth keeping. He'd thought about it, in the 6 months since she'd left, more times than he would have admitted to anyone, including himself. Sounded the same. That was something he hadn't been sure of, whether the things he remembered accurately were the things as they'd been, or things his memory had reassembled into what it wanted. The laugh was the same. The quality of her attention was the same. The way she made him feel like the things he'd never said out loud were somehow already heard. That was the same too. Emma, he said. Ji-hoon, she said. I want to be clear, he said, in the tone he used when he was being precise about something that mattered, about what this is. She lifted her head and looked at him. You're not a consultant, he said. I am though. Professionally. Professionally. Yes. He met her eyes. But that's not the category I'm working in right now. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very simply, I know. You've known. For a while. How long? She considered this. The day I left your office. You didn't say anything when I handed in the notice. You just looked at the proposal on your desk for about 40 seconds, and then you said thank you in a voice that meant something else entirely. I knew then. Ji-hoon absorbed this. I transferred the funding the same day. I know. The notification came through while I was on the flight. She looked back at the river. I sat with it for a while. And I decided I needed to finish building the water system first. A pause. Some things need to be in order before you can. She gestured. A small arc of her hand that encompassed the river, the village, them. Before you can build the next thing on a solid foundation. Ji-hoon thought about this. Then he said, That's very structural of you. I do structural, Emma said. I know, he said. It's one of the things. One of the things, she said, and her voice was warm. He put his arm around her and she let him, and they sat by the river while the last light left the sky and the stars came out. The same impossible carpet of them she'd seen every night for 6 months and never stopped noticing. Park, who had come to find them to report that the school principal had invited the full team to breakfast the next morning, stopped at the riverbank about 20 meters back, assessed the situation with his particular brand of disciplined perception, and turned around silently to go report that he had been unable to locate either of them and they would have to manage breakfast logistics in the morning. Dae-young, who had also been sent, had already turned around before reaching the riverbank. He had assessed the situation from further back and made his decision with greater efficiency. Park acknowledged this with a nod when they met back at the vehicle. They did not discuss it. Some things did not require comment. The next morning Ji-hoon helped dismantle and clean the tools, pack the equipment, and record the final phase documentation with the methodical care he brought to everything. He worked alongside Joseph, who had, over the course of a week, stopped treating him with professional wariness and started treating him with the particular respect reserved for people who do what they say they'll do. Joseph shook his hand at the end, both hands around Ji-hoon's, the way that meant something. You'll come back, Joseph said. Not a question. Yes, Ji-hoon said. On the drive to the airport, Emma fell asleep against the window. Ji-hoon watched the road and the light and the land moving past. In the weeks after, the world would notice that Ji-hoon Kang's organization had grown quieter, cleaner, that certain community initiatives received unusual levels of support, that the man himself appeared occasionally in places that made no strategic sense, a village infrastructure project in rural Kenya, a school supply delivery, a grant review meeting with the NGO board where he sat at the back and asked two precise questions. The underworld watched all of this and decided, collectively, that Ji-hoon had definitely gone soft. They were correct in the way that water is soft, which is to say, wrong about what that means. Here is what this story was underneath all of it. It was a story about the places inside people that get walled off, not out of coldness, but out of the specific protective intelligence that knows a thing was taken once and might be taken again. Ji-hoon built systems because systems could be held. Viper made chaos because order had a price he'd already paid. Emma had none of those walls, and it cost her nothing, and that was the rarest kind of person. Someone who had found a way to remain open and still remain standing. The lesson, if there is one, isn't that love fixes people. It doesn't fix people. What it does, when it's real, is make the walls unnecessary. Ji-hoon didn't change because Emma arrived. He became more himself because she paid attention to who that actually was, past the structure and the microfiber cloth and the 23-page PDF, past the silence and the controlled rooms, all the way to the person who looked at a photograph of a river 4 times in 6 months and called it nothing. He deleted the rules. Not because rules don't matter. Because the right house doesn't need them in a PDF. The right house already knows where the coffee goes. And somewhere in a Kenyan village, water runs clean through a filtration system built by an apron-wearing crime lord, a hospital corner enthusiast, and a mechanic who fixed everything that was broken. And every morning, in a place that was not the upper left cabinet and was not anywhere that had been decided in advance, someone makes coffee. And it is exactly right. Thank you for staying with this story until the very last word. That means more than a quick like or a scroll past, you actually let it land, and that's the whole point of telling it. If this one stayed with you, the wrench, the wet cement, the crying crime boss, the apron, the river, leave a comment and tell me which moment hit the hardest. I read every single one. Hit like if this story was worth the hour. Subscribe because more stories like this one are coming. Same care, same intention, same refusal to let the ending be anything less than real. I'll see you in the next one.